Well, we had a beautiful yacht. My father had left me some money and I'd sailed all my childhood and then had got back in, done some of my yachting exams later in life. So we had a 44-foot sailing boat, which we could have lived on. We had friends who lived on much smaller boats, but we decided with children and grandchildren eventually that was not going to be it for us.
We sailed into Island Harbour one day, and there was a barge there already moored, and it was for sale.
Yes.
And that was sort of what got us thinking. We actually looked at that barge, and we could see the potential.
And we didn't want to sail around the world. We didn't want a boat that moved necessarily. If we bought a larger sailing boat to live on, there'd have been the mast and the sails wasted.
People who advertise barges are slightly dishonest, possibly. The photographs of many barges were not what it was like when we actually got on board. This one, on the other hand, was. We came on board, it was dry, it was spacious, there was no furniture on board apart from anything else.
But it was the light, wasn't it?
It was the light, absolutely.
Everything else we looked at. You climbed down a steep set of stairs because the conversion was right down in the bottom of the hull.
Yeah, and this has been built up.
The light was incredible, and we knew we didn't want somewhere that felt dark.
Yeah.
You couldn't see out, whereas here there are 20 windows, and it just felt really, really light and spacious.
It felt solid as well. It felt good.
The outside was hideous. It hadn't been painted
for
years.
Yes, it wasn't in bad condition. It just was dull,
yeah,
grey and miserable.
We basically moved a 4-bedroom house on board. It was fantastic.
It's like buying a house. You walk in and you think, this is the place we can live in, and that's exactly what happened for us.
We found the boat in Hampton Court, and we had grown up in Sunbury and Teddington and Twickenham, so it was like going back to home territory, having lived in Portsmouth for 28 years. And we needed a survey done, so we got a skipper and we took it down the river to Twickenham, to Eel Pie Island, where there is a boatyard that deals with barges. They pulled her out of the water onto their dry slip, and the surveyor, who it turned out had been at school with Roger, and the first hammer blow he put on the hull went straight through it, and we were not anticipating any difficulties with the hull. The owner
was the owner
very upset about it, but he'd actually, it turned out, had salt water sacrificial anodes put on the bottom of the hull, and he'd kept it in fresh water, so the hull was eaten away because of the wrong piece of science. But Eel Pie Island is in the middle of a residential area. People live on it, so they have no licence to do shot blasting, which is what our surveyor insisted on. He wanted the hull completely cleaned. So they arranged very speedily to have the boat taken down to the only functioning dry dock on the Thames, which is down at Greenwich. So we then got the boat down to there, put it in the dry dock, where it was then replated.
It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful, driving down the Thames through the centre of London in the rush hour on a beautiful July afternoon, and driving under Westminster Bridge and looking up just to the left and seeing it was 10 to 5 up Big Ben, and all the cars over Westminster Bridge and the embankment and everywhere else completely at a standstill, and we were just meandering down through the middle. It was glorious.
Greenwich was extraordinary. It's the only working dry boatyard that's around. That's what we were led to believe, and it was like walking into a giant Steptoe and Son film set. Every piece of boat, jumble, debris, anything you can imagine was piled up. Great big puddles, pools of oil, the most scary metal walkways that we had to go up and down, and the barge, we realised how enormous it was.
That's the big thing.
Looking up at the hull, and the surveyor decided that rather than cut and paste bits of hull, he would have it replated. So they had some very young Polish welders, who are apparently the best in the world, but they worked there. A very, very nice foreman called Wink, who was human, whereas the owner was absolutely scary and I think completely bonkers and frightened the life out of us, and was clearly not well in the head. He was very erratic, he shouted at us, he made all sorts of threats about throwing us out, but then he delayed the work, and it really was. But our engineer and I went up from Portsmouth to Greenwich a lot of times, and Bob oversaw the work for us. But it was filthy because they shot blasted it, so there was grey-black sand over everything inside and outside. And then they painted it with oxide paint, and then they epoxied the bottom, and then they put the sort of black tar coat on top. So we were there for about a month, and then finally the owner rang me up and said, right, you've got to get out. We were saying, but we've got to organise a skipper, and we need the weather to be right, and we need to fuel it, and we need to do the final checks on the engine. He said, no, you've got to come, you've got to go out, I've got another boat to come in. So we haired up there early one morning, not really prepared to do the journey, and he just literally pushed us out as this other boat was coming in.
Yeah, another boat was coming in as we were going out. We sort of just edged our way around.
Yeah. So we then had to go up to nearer to Tower Bridge to the fuel dock. We'd had the windows all boarded up, the surveyor had insisted on that, so we were virtually ready to go to sea. It was very scary, and there were moments when I just thought, we are making such an enormous mistake. How do we ever go back from this? We hadn't sold the house, then had to get involved in getting a boat mortgage. That involved all sorts of other stuff and paperwork and negotiations. It was a very frightening process, and once or twice we did wonder what on earth we were doing. I would lie awake at night and wonder, what if we do this? What if we can't buy it? What if it all falls apart? But it didn't, and we've never regretted it for a second. We were very clear we didn't want a project. We didn't want to go and buy a hull that would have been really cheap and do the conversion. We just are not that creative, and we're not very practical. So some of the people that live here with us have done that and are doing that, and we're just full of admiration. So we bought a completed home in that sense. Anyway.
Yeah, we did.
People kept saying, "Oh, you are brave," and we didn't feel brave at all. It was a lifestyle choice. It was something we really wanted to do.
All that you hear on the shipping forecast, like North Foreland and so on, we drove round, and it was just great going out the Thames estuary and just seeing those very strange forts that were built up in all the towers during to keep the Germans out during the war. It was just like something out of some science fiction film.
The scariest moment of, I think, the entire history of owning the barge was in Ramsgate Harbour. We were moored up to the fuel berth. The wind had blown us and the fuel berth off the wall. We really thought the chains were going to break. And the other side of us was a long row of gin palaces. And I just sat in the middle of the lobby with my head in my hands, and I thought, I'm going to have to die because I cannot work out what we're going to do if we smash the back of that row of motorboats. It was absolutely terrifying, but the chains didn't break and we didn't hit anything, so it was a completely misplaced fear in the end. But when we were coming into Portsmouth Harbour, the skipper was constantly on the radio to the Queen's Harbour Master, and he would call up as Dutch Barge Jan, Dutch Barge Jan, and we thought in the end, actually, we liked the sound of that. So when we had the nameplates made, we decided we wouldn't change the name of it, but we'd call it Dutch Barge Jan rather than just the 3 letters. So on our nameplate we've got a proper length of name, and it was just because of the way he called up. And he made all the ferries, he made the cross-channel ferry wait for us, the Isle of Wight ferries waiting, because Dutch Barge Jan was coming through, and it was just very exciting. Sadly, we know very little about the history of the barge. We know that the hull is made of riveted steel, built in 1898. We don't know whether she would have sailed originally. She's around about 100 tonnes in weight, 110 foot, which is 33 metres long. It's about 20 foot wide, and she only draws about 1 metre in depth. And that's just about what we know. There is a revival in Holland, we understand, where people are restoring them, and I would love to go over and have a look and try and get some idea of what she might have looked like in her working days. There are basically 3 types of Dutch barge hull, and this one is a motor clipper, so it's higher at the bow. Some of them look like a clog, and some of them are narrower at the bow and lower, so this is a motor clipper.
What we do know is that when she was a working barge, she would have been 20 feet longer than she is now. She had been 135 feet. Because what often happens, as happened here, the people converting them think, probably rightly, that nobody is going to buy a 135-foot barge, so they chop off the middle bit and then weld it together. So we have a weld around the middle of our
We have a very unneatly sewn appendix scar down the side of the hull.
When you know it's there, it's quite noticeable, but if you don't really see it. But we do know, because of the shape of the barge and the bulkheads, is that it would be a grain carrier on the Rhine.
Lots of people who've come on board, and we have a lot of strangers we welcome on board.
And lots of friends.
Wow, this is interesting. And mostly it's the men, so I'd love to do this, but the wife wouldn't like it. And they say, well, do you move it? And we said, no, we deliberately bought it as our home, but I really would like to move it. I would absolutely like to take it back across the channel on a nice calm day, and I would like to drive it into Paris. And I would like to have a car on the front, which you see in France. These barges have got little smart cars on the front,
which we could put on.
Or I'd like to go and explore the Dutch canals, where these barges would be small compared to some of the ones that run up and down commercially. The engineer is not prepared to come with me. My husband is not prepared to come with me. So at the moment I've got no practical arrangements to do it. But that really is a pipe dream. I really would like to. And I would actually like to find out what it would take to be qualified to drive it, because I think it would be great fun to go out on the Solent and be able to drop a hook outside Osborne Bay. We can't get anybody to define what a professional skipper is. So the skipper of the person that we bought this off had no qualifications at all on paper. He just worked all his life on Dutch barges. I have a sailing yachtmaster certificate, which means technically I can drive stuff up to 200 tonnes. This is only 100, but is it sail, or would this count? Other people have said no, I need to go do the MCA maritime exams. So it's a complete mystery about what actually defines a professionally qualified skipper to drive this thing. I think probably you just need balls of steel and quite a lot of courage.
A good number of the boats that we looked at were really in very, very poor condition. As Anne had said, we didn't want a project, and they weren't sold as being in great condition, whereas this one was in good condition. It was only, but the hull's obviously a massive thing. But apart from that, I think everything was fine, and it wasn't, in that sense, it wasn't a risk, because the survey had only picked that up. Everything else was fine.
The only risk was that we might not like it and we burnt all our bridges because we have no home. There is nowhere else to go.
And that's still a risk, of course, because when it comes to it, at some stage, if we're going to sell it, someone's got to buy it from us. And this is it. We haven't got any.
We have
there's no fallback.
There are people who think we've been daft because it's not really a financial investment.
That's true.
But we were at a stage of life where we don't care about that. If we didn't do it now, when would we ever do it? We haven't got a lot of money. In fact, we haven't got any spare money. So investment for us is not something of massive interest. So this is what we've invested in. This is our life. It is the most wonderful life, and I certainly, we argue about this. What happened if one of us died? I would never want to live in a house again. I would like to stay on this until they carry me off or I get shoved off the back. But you're not so sure, are you? So we don't know what would happen in the future, but actually you can't live wondering what if, whatever. It's just been brilliant 4 years. I hope it will go on.
I think it is something to be shared. I don't think I would like to live here just by myself. I think if Anne popped her clogs, then I probably would sell up. But I'm not quite sure where else I'd like to go, because this is just such a fabulous place to be.
I think I'd
don't
stay.
know.
I would.
You would
stay.
definitely stay.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure, really. Not because I don't like it, but because it is something to be shared.